Miami might land the best offensive tackle in the 2026 class. But boy, that's going to be hard.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin, and thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in this, the greatest sport on planet Earth. Plenty of recruiting and portal buzz all over the place. What does Brock Harris mean for BYU? More than just a really talented tight end. And DBs are going to be plentiful when the transfer portal's up in less than a week. That's all on today's show, which is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Brian Smith of the Portal Podcast is here to discuss Jackson Cantwell and Immanuel Iheanacho and one of the top transfer offensive linemen that are in the portal. So let's start with Cantwell, Brian. There's a Cristobal over at 24/7 Sports to the Miami Hurricanes for Cantwell to go there. He and Alex Mirabal, he being Mario Cristobal, of course, along with his O-line coach Alex Mirabal, are a premier elite tandem when it comes to recruiting offensive linemen. They have not struggled with that in the last couple of cycles. But then you put Michigan into the fold, and then you put Oregon into the fold, and Missouri's going to go to a visit because that's where he is. This is one of the most complex recruitments and high-profile ones for the 2026 recruiting class, but would you say the Hurricanes are the leader in the clubhouse right now?
No, I would not, because I don't think anybody is the quote-unquote leader in the clubhouse. He's probably overwhelmed at this point. Being around Cantwell, he's one of the nicest guys you'd meet, unless you're the poor sucker that's in front of him on 1st and 10. He's going to go through the process. It'll be based on the visits. I don't think there's a lead. I know some people go, oh, it's Oregon, oh, it's Michigan. He's going to take the visits and just play it out. He's going to play the game.
Is this one that you feel like drags on almost all the way to the season? Because, I mean, this is the top offensive tackle. 24/7's rankings have him as the number 3 player overall. But of the top 5 overall guys in the class of 2026, 4 of them are already committed. One of them's to Houston, by the way. Just want to throw that out there. 5-star quarterback, awesome. Keyshawn Henderson, who is a football player, to be sure. But he's kind of the highest rated guy. Some services have Cantwell as the number 1 overall player in the class of 2026. And look, I have followed Mario Cristobal in his career for a very long time. He's brought in more than a few high-profile offensive linemen. You know, before he transferred to BYU, Kingsley Suamataia, who's now about to start for the Kansas City Chiefs. Penei Sewell, he recruited while he was at Oregon. He's brought in guys at Miami. Do you think that pedigree is helping Miami stand out in a sense? And how do you think that pitch kind of contrasts with what Michigan has, which is, hey, we just offensive line and run gamed our way with defense to beating the national champs in a game that we shouldn't have?
I think that's an interesting pitch for both, because you got to be who you are. Michigan, I think they don't really hide from what they do. And in this case, for Cantwell, it's pretty easy. But Cristobal and Mirabal, they run the ball in a similar fashion. And I know that Penei Sewell, because Mirabal's talked to me about him before. I mean, he said he's just unbelievable, probably the best kid he'd ever coached and all that. They're going to use that. Why would you not? I mean, you and I have talked about Penei. Like, what was there not to like? By the time he was done with his sophomore year, he was ready for the professional ranks, in my opinion. He had to play another year just because that's the rule. Yeah, you're going to pitch that. We can get you to that point. So everybody's got a little niche with it, and I think Miami can use that because Cantwell really wants to make it to the NFL. His dad wants him to make it to the NFL. So Miami has a chance with that, but like everybody else, they're going to get their OBE, and we'll see where it goes. But the pitch for every school is just a little bit different than the other one.
One of the other top offensive linemen in this class, Immanuel Iheanacho, 5-star offensive tackle from back east. Could he really wind up at Maryland, Brian? Like, that's just not a name that's as random and obscure to some people, I'm sure, as Houston having a 5-star quarterback right now. But you hear all the time, well, we're in the age of change in college football, and it's not the way it used to be. Yeah, 5 years ago, I don't know how serious Maryland can be going after a kid like this, but here we are, and it kind of seems like Maryland, from some industry insiders and stuff they've put out, are the leaders for Immanuel Iheanacho.
Not only is that the rumor, but they're in on it for several other kids in their greater, like Maryland, New Jersey, PA area. And like Jair Edwards, maybe the best safety in the country. They might get him. This is real. Like their NIL has changed everything. They've went more focused. It's always going to be a basketball school, in my opinion. I mean, it should be DC for basketball. It's incredible. But at the same time, it's really good for football too. And Maryland is arguably a top 5 school over the last 50 years for underachieving, because they only had one run in the 80s when they had like Boomer Esiason and some other. I mean, they've had a few guys, but like that's it. And they got all that talent there because it always leaves. You've never been alive when they've been good. Like,
I mean, that's why it kind of, I didn't know how to register what you just said with underachieving, because I'm going, I don't know, Maryland's never been, whether they were in the ACC or whether they were in the Big Ten, they've just kind of been there.
Because they have so much talent at home and they suck at keeping it home. Horrific. It's the city that never keeps kids home. Ohio State for one kid, Florida State for another kid, Notre Dame for a kid, USC for a kid, Stanford for everybody. Just kind of gets one guy. And it's been that way for my entire life. Maryland will get 2 out of the top 15 kids out of the DC and or state of Maryland a year kind of deal. The way it's always been. Now they're trying to change that. And if they do, I mean, they could be a top 15 program, because that state is loaded per capita. It's incredible. But yeah, I need to still see it. I need to see it on National Signing Day. So I understand what Spencer McLaughlin's saying, but right now they're doing pretty good.
Yeah, that's not a bad place to be if you're a program trying to climb your way out of the bottom of now an 18-team Big Ten.
Oh
they're definitely a bottom tier. You know, I put that into 3 tiers. They're a 3rd-tier program in the Big Ten right now. But is there an opportunity to change that? Yeah, I think that's why you see so much money flying around in college football, because everybody gets the sense, hey, if we just commit, if we get dollars and we put it into a roster and put it into a program and a coaching staff, yeah, we can be good just like everybody else. And look, that school over there that used to be ahead of us, they're not as financially committed, or they don't have the resources we do, and now we can leapfrog ahead of them. That happens in all sorts of sports at various levels across college sport athletics right now. And it might be that Maryland kind of sees this as an opportunity for them to elevate. I mean, going after a 5-star offensive tackle, it sounds insane. It sounds crazy, but alas, here we are. I want to shift to the transfer portal momentarily, because there's a guy in the portal from Memphis who I know you love, Brian, and some guys are able to enter because their coach leaves or graduate transfers that can go into the transfer portal basically any time. Everybody else, April 16th is the day where everybody's going to pour in. I mean, it's going to be chaos, and I'll be covering it here on the show, but tell us about this guy out of Memphis.
Xavier Hill, 6'4", 320, began his career at LSU, transferred to Memphis. He's been a 2-time all-conference player. And here's the key. He's not just a great tackle, not just a great left or right. He's played both. He's played guard. He's a guy that graded out on PFF last year at the following: pass protection 83.2, 86.8, offense 83.2, and run blocking 80.4. So all of them are at an extremely high level. And over the last 2 seasons, he's got 1,756 snaps. Your greatest ability is your availability. He's on the field. He's going to set the trend at offensive tackle. I mean, it's lock, stock, and barrel. I will be shocked if there's a better tackle in the portal. And again, he can play guard too. So there's nothing not to like about this guy.
Yeah, 6'4" for an offensive tackle. Little shorter than they tend to come nowadays. Do you think that's a problem if he goes to the Big Ten, SEC, or even the Big 12 or ACC?
Not based on the way he's played, but I mean, your height is one thing, your length is another. He's not a guy that's really struggled in that department. And if you're technically sound, it doesn't matter. He's a grad student, so he's seen it all. I think he'll be just fine.
Brian Smith, the Portal Podcast, longtime recruiting insider. Brian, appreciate the time as always. And we're sticking on the trail, but narrowing it down to Provo. They just landed a big commitment. What does it mean for BYU in the long run? First, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. So FanDuel is making betting easy, of course, whether it's picking your favorite team or diving into player props from three-pointers to steals to assists. FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player props. And if you want to bet college football, which you might because you're listening to or watching this show, you can do that. You have got win totals for every Power 4 team plus Notre Dame. You've got national title odds. You have got conference championship odds. You've got individual games that can be wagered upon that are going to take place in about 4.5 months. That's all over there. Check them out at FanDuel.com. Claim your $250 in bonus bets today. Head to FanDuel.com. Do not overlook what just happened in Provo. The Cougars of BYU just landed their third highest rated recruit ever. Not of this cycle, not since Kalani Sitake has been there. Their third highest rated commit of all time. Jake Hatch, Locked On BYU Cougars, is here to discuss Brock Harris, who is a borderline 5-star tight end and an incredibly talented guy. We'll get to what he brings to the table, but I want to start with the big picture recruiting angle on this one, Jake. I look at, the schools that were after him. Oregon was one of them, amongst others. And sure, it helps that he is an in-state recruit, but BYU, getting a verbal commit, that's great. Got to work to keep him committed because this is not just a big-time player. This is a big-time recruit in 2026.
Yeah, and that's the thing about this, Spencer, is they cannot afford to kind of let this say, hey, he's committed, we're good. No, they're going to have to continue to keep him engaged until the early signing window opens in December and get him signed then. The bigger point that you make there is this is a kickoff, hopefully, for BYU football to put together what could be their greatest recruiting class quite literally ever. Brock Harris, you mentioned he's a borderline 5-star guy. Well, guess what? They've got, I think, 6, 7, 8 guys who are either 4 or 5-star talents out there they're hoping to land in this cycle alone.
Utah was after him. Michigan after him. Georgia after him. Dan Lanning was in the state of Utah in the last couple of months to see Brock Harris at his basketball game, and BYU comes out of the pack. So how do the Cougars capitalize on that? How do they go forward on the trail, Jake, and say, hey, now we've got Brock Harris. Hey, let's go get another highly rated blue chip guy. Hey, let's go, the class is sitting according to 24/7's rankings, number 37 in the country. How do we get that close to number 15? Because I think history shows you want to get into that top tier of college football, you've got to be at least in the top 15 sort of range recruiting.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. The next guy up probably for BYU is Ryder Lyons, and you and I talked about him not that long ago on this very program. Here's the deal. I know that Brock and Ryder are very, very close. They have spent many, many hours throwing the football together. They talk often from what I understand, and having a guy of what Brock's caliber is might be an enticing prospect for Ryder Lyons to pick BYU.
I look at the Ryder Lyons commit or potential commit, and again, you're going up against the heavy hitters, but I think people, no matter the geographic advantage or, Ryder Lyons is of an LDS background, and maybe that gives BYU an ingrained advantage they wouldn't otherwise have. I say, who cares? It's BYU. You stand out with a kid whatever way you can. And do you get the sense at all that it's going to affect Ryder Lyons' decision, that he might look at Brock Harris being at BYU and go, I want to throw the ball to that guy? Because who wouldn't want to throw the ball to him? But do you get the sense that there could be an impact there?
No, I think there will be an impact because, as I said, they're close, they're friends, and obviously having a guy like Brock, who you mentioned, is a really, really phenomenal athlete. Most of all, that could be a guy like Ryder Lyons saying, "Yeah, well, we're going to go on missions about the same time. Why wouldn't I want to come back and throw the rock to that guy?" And the other part of it is there's a lot of other offensive skill talent that BYU's chasing in the recruiting pool in this 2026 class that could also go a long ways to selling a guy like Ryder Lyons, saying, "Hey, BYU's where I want to be because look at all these weapons that'll be there with me."
Yeah, Harris, by the way, 6'6", 238 from Pineview High School down in St. George, which is a city I'm about to be moving to, actually, and is a wonderful, wonderful place indeed. But he's someone who athletically doesn't move like a lot of tight ends. He's not your traditional catch a pass every now and then in the flat and run for 5 yards sort of guy. He's kind of a borderline receiver hybrid type. Like, he's a highly rated prospect for a reason, Jake. And I think he's someone who can step onto BYU's campus, whether that's in 26 or 27. And I think he makes an impact right away.
Okay, so Spencer, I said this on Locked On Cougars when he committed. A person inside the BYU football program sent me this message, said he's an absolute freak. And they also added shortly thereafter another text message to me. I honestly believe he would start for us right now. And he's still an 18-year-old high school senior, Spencer. He's that good of an athlete. They really think he is a phenomenal prospect. And you mentioned the teams that were after him. The likes of Georgia, when they had Brock Bowers and some of the tight ends they've had, what Oregon's had in the recent past as well. They had some really, really big programs after him. I think every single one of them see absolute star potential in this young man.
Yeah, I think it's hard to not when you watch the tape. And certainly, there's going to be a jump up to the college level coming from the St. George area. I get it. But athletically, kind of looks like he's got the juice to do all of that. But let's zoom out again with this BYU recruiting class, because I've talked a lot about Arizona State recently and the surge they've had in the 26 cycle. And yeah, it's early, though I will just point out to my everydayers out there, every day that goes by where you hear me say it's early, that's one more day in the recruiting class that has gone by. So I look at where BYU sits now. I think you want to try and climb at least inside the top 25. I think that is feasible. I mean, you look at what Arizona State has with a top 20 class right now. They picked up another commit the other day. You've got to be able to capitalize on the momentum that you create on the field. ASU is doing that. Do you feel like BYU is in position to do that for this 2026 class?
I do believe they are in position to do that. Now, obviously, you got to seal the deal and get guys signed. I'm talking about the Pula twins out of Timpview High School, who are both currently committed to UCLA, but it's very clear that they've got some wandering eyes and are looking at all options. There's another offensive tackle. He used to play defensive line in Bot Mulatalo at Lone Peak here in Utah, who's a bona fide four-star prospect, former Oregon commit. I know that you're well aware of. There's other guys out there, like I already mentioned, a Ryder Lyons. All these are bona fide 4- and 5-star talents, and if BYU can scoop them up, and I believe they're in a pretty good position to compete for them to the bitter end until they sign somewhere else. If BYU can do just that, yeah, they can find themselves inside the top 25 recruiting rankings, and that's where BYU aspires to be. They want to be a top-tier program, and they've got a lot of work to do to prove it.
I look at Arizona State and say they could be the best recruiting team in the Big 12 year in and year out. You've got a lot of talent in your backyard. You've got a beautiful campus. You've got sunshine to recruit to. There are a lot of appealing elements about Provo as well. Where do you think? And again, you're in the first. You've made a first step on a 57-step plan to getting to the point where you can recruit at a level that allows you to put together a roster year in and year out with the portal, maybe just in the next couple of years, but one that you don't just feel like can make the playoff, but could actually make a run with some of the bigger teams in all of college football. How does BYU get there? How do they go from, hey, they picked up one kid, but everybody else like, they're just okay. They're trying to do more with less. How does BYU, along with ASU or anybody in the Big 12, kind of take that step in recruiting?
Well, here's the thing. You just mentioned the term more with less. That's what BYU's done. The last year, that 11-2 team, Spencer, off the top of my head, I can think of, two guys across that starting lineup who were a 4-star prospect. We're talking a bunch of 2- and 3-star guys. BYU has relied heavily on development, bringing in a 2- and 3-star guy and essentially getting 4- and 5-star production out of them. I use the term on my podcast all the time. Yeah, doing more with less is great. Why not do more with more? And do more with more is to get 4- and 5-star guys and get the development you talk about, but you can get more talent. And obviously that would increase BYU's ability to compete at a very high level.
The hottest teams in the Big 12 recruiting-wise right now, Arizona State, BYU with the Brock Harris commitment. We'll see if they can get Ryder Lyons. Texas Tech, I think you have to throw them into the fold. Yes. And it's not as if there aren't other schools in the conference that have the potential. Anybody in Texas, Baylor, TCU, there's no reason you can't be in this sort of range. And I'm not saying that they're, just completely ignoring recruit, but they don't have the sort of buzz. Texas Tech, a top 5 transfer portal class in college football, up there with LSU. That's different. BYU landing Brock Harris, and if they get Ryder Lyons, we'll be talking about him again right here on this very show. I can assure you, you've got to change. The winds have got to change at some point for the Big 12 if they want to elevate their profile as a football conference and be more than just a fun story and a fun league. And these are the sorts of battles, Jake. These are the ones that you got to win.
And that's the fun part about this is I think the Big 12 is intent on making a push at this. And you mentioned ASU, Texas Tech, any of the Texas schools, heck, even a UCF, the inroads they can make in the state of Florida. The hope is that across the league, that the entire Big 12 will up the ante a little bit and push harder and harder in recruiting and hopefully level the playing field a little bit.
Jake Hatch, Locked On BYU Cougars, leveling the playing field for all your knowledge bases out there because he's got you where you need to be as always. Defensive backs in the transfer portal, there are going to be more than I think the sport might know what to do with. So the transfer portal is now less than a week away from opening, and already I start to get the sense two position groups in particular are going to be really abundant. Defensive back and defensive line. Let's focus on the defensive backs today, because if you're a fan of a program, which you probably are if you're listening to or watching this show, and you're wondering, hey, are there any defensive backs that my team might be after? Yeah, there will be. I'll give you 3 options here on today's show. I don't know that these guys wind up in the Big Ten or SEC. I do wonder, because they're leaving their current schools, if they aren't going to wind up in the ACC or in the Big 12. So let's start with LJ Green. And he's an interesting player to me because he's only 5'10", 170 pounds. Now, as an Oregon guy, let me tell you, if you go get a skill position player, secondary member or wide receiver specifically here, from Troy, who's undersized but talented, if your coaching and development and situation is right, it could work out. I'm referring, of course, to Tez Johnson, who, if he had not gotten injured this past year, would have put together back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons with the Ducks. He's small. He was tiny. Well, LJ Green is not a big guy. I think that's more punitive as a defensive back than as a wide receiver, because you have to take guys on rather than trying to run away from them on the defensive side of the ball. He's 5'10", 170 pounds, but he started this past year for Troy, and his PFF grade was just a shade under 66. It was 66.4 in coverage. That's okay. There's nothing wrong. It's not bad. It's not great. Frankly, I expected it to be higher. But when I look at a PFF grade, I'm looking to add context to a holistic picture. This isn't a guy who I would think enters the portal. Maybe he's just going to a higher level G5. Maybe he's going to a Tulane, a Boise, somewhere like that. Okay, yeah, that would make a solid amount of sense. But when you have speed, which LJ Green certainly does, and you have proven production, which he also does, this past year, 27 tackles, 6 passes defended, and 2 interceptions, he's got 3 years of eligibility left. He's trying to, at the very least, find a new school that elevates his profile, maybe so one day he can prove where he's going to wind up. But I won't be surprised if he winds up in the Big 12 or in the ACC. I just wonder how that size translates. That's one of the biggest things, along with overall speed, when you go up levels of competition. There are guys that have the same size and stature that are at the FCS ranks as are in the SEC. What's the difference? Their twitchiness, their athleticism. Sure, their ball skills can be a part of it, but that's the biggest factor. So how can he evolve and adapt to that at 5'10", 170 pounds? Is probably a little easier, though certainly they're big-bodied guys, but I don't imagine LJ Green is a starting outside corner. He sounds to me like someone who would go out and be a starting nickel corner, but he's leaving Troy, which is a good Group of 5 football program, by the way, in the Sun Belt. He's not leaving him just for fun. Maybe there's a coaching issue. I don't know. I don't suspect that's the case. I suspect he's going to find a Power 4 home. Jack Cain's another one coming from Oregon State. I was a little. These are the ones that you gotta watch out for a little bit, because when I see a guy like Cain go in the portal, I think, oh well, a lot of good players have been in the secondary in Oregon State the last several years. Maybe this is the latest. He had an interception, 32 tackles this past year. His PFF grade was 51.3, and he logged 422 snaps. So it wasn't a shortage of opportunity. But this I wanted to bring up because I think there are a lot of guys that go into the transfer portal that might be seeking greener pastures. They might not always find them. Now, maybe I'm wrong. I'd be lying if I said I studied every single snap that he played a season ago. PFF did and said he was a below average player in the secondary, but maybe he's someone who gets picked up and goes and pops, because the expectation when a transfer comes in is that it's someone who makes an immediate impact. But even go back to LJ Green, who I was just talking about, coming from Troy. He's got 3 years of eligibility remaining. What's to say a school doesn't bring him in and try to develop him a little? You always have the perception that a transfer is someone who comes in and plugs a hole, because that's mostly what they are. There are plenty of guys who transfer and then wind up having a more high school trajectory developmental career, and they go to a place for one season and realize, no, this isn't a place where I'm going to succeed the way that I thought I was going to, and I want a place that's going to further my development a little bit more. Just something to watch for. But I think the biggest name secondary-wise in the transfer portal right now, that could change in less than a week, is Marcavius Brown, who had a career best 72 Pro Football Focus grade a year ago with Purdue. He started 15 of 16 games over the last couple of years, 9 pass breakups over that time. He's 5'11", 176 pounds. So again, not a huge guy, but is someone who went from one Power 4 school, the SEC, when he was at Ole Miss, to another Power 4 school when he was at Purdue. Now everybody left Purdue. Barry Odom is in charge now after it didn't work out with Ryan Walters. I don't know that he got dealt a totally fair hand. He's doing okay. He's the defensive coordinator up at Washington and Seattle now. But this is a guy who was a 4-star recruit coming out of high school in the class of 2021. Now, he didn't play a ton this past season. He was the 5th most snap cornerback for Purdue with 231 snaps. And that might be a part of the reason that he wants to go somewhere else. This is someone who's going into his 5th year. So this is the opposite of an LJ Green, where I think there could be a developmental aspect because he's got 3 years of eligibility left. I'm pretty sure Brown just has the one, given that he was class of 2021. I mean, guys can get, all sorts of reasons that they come up with to get an extra year of eligibility. But guys who have been around at multiple Power 4 programs, who just had the best season of their career, who are going into their 5th year of college football, those don't come around very often. So again, the portal isn't even open. And here are 3 options, some more appealing than others, that I think are going to wind up at Power 4 schools being secondary starters. What's going to happen next week when the portal officially opens to everybody else who's not a graduate transfer or whose coach wasn't fired/left in the last 30 days? What's going to happen then? I guess we'll just have to wait and find out. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.